Dear viewers, today's story will change how you see the power of a simple promise. It's about Mrs. Elena Martinez, a 34-year-old high school teacher in Denver, and her student Jake Williams, a 16-year-old boy whose courage in the face of impossible odds would inspire an entire community. What started as an ordinary Tuesday morning would become a journey that neither of them expected, a bond that went beyond the classroom, and a last wish that would test everything Elena believed about what it means to truly care for someone. Stay with me until the very end, because this story will show you that sometimes the smallest acts of love create the biggest miracles. And if stories like this move your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. Elena had always been different from other teachers. She didn't just teach history, she lived it. Every lesson felt like a story, every assignment like an adventure. Her classroom walls were covered with maps from different time periods, quotes from historical figures, and photos from her travels around the world. Students didn't just learn dates and facts in her room. They learned about human courage, about people who changed the world against impossible odds. At 34, Elena had been teaching for 12 years. She had that rare gift of making every student feel seen, heard, and valued. She remembered birthdays, asked about family troubles, and stayed after school to help struggling students catch up. Her colleagues often joked that she cared too much, but Elena believed that caring was never too much. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Elena arrived at Jefferson High School at 7:30, her coffee still steaming, her lesson plans perfectly organized. She was setting up for her first period world history class when she noticed something unusual. Jake Williams, one of her favorite students, wasn't in his usual front row seat. Jake was the kind of student every teacher dreams of having. Curious, respectful, always asking thoughtful questions that made the whole class think deeper. He had this way of connecting historical events to modern life that impressed even Elena. But more than that, Jake was kind. He helped other students with their work, never made anyone feel stupid for asking questions, and always had a smile ready. When second period started, and Jake still wasn't there, Elena felt a small worry creep into her chest. Jake had perfect attendance. In 2 years of having him in her classes, he had never missed a single day. Something was wrong. During her lunch break, Elena walked to the main office to ask about Jake. Mrs. Peterson, the school secretary, looked up from her computer with sad eyes. "Oh, Elena," she said softly. "I was wondering when someone would ask. Jake's in the hospital. His parents called this morning." Elena's heart stopped. "What happened? Is he okay?" Mrs. Peterson shook her head slowly. "I don't have all the details, but it sounds serious. Very serious." That afternoon, Elena couldn't focus on her lessons. Her mind kept wandering to Jake, wondering what had happened, hoping he was okay. After school, she drove straight to Denver General Hospital. The pediatric ward was quiet except for the soft beeping of machines and the gentle voices of nurses. Elena found Jake's room number and knocked softly on the door. "Come in," came a weak voice from inside. Elena pushed open the door and saw Jake lying in the hospital bed, looking smaller and more fragile than she had ever seen him. His usually bright eyes were tired, and his skin was pale. Sitting beside him were his parents, David and Maria Williams, both looking exhausted and worried. "Mrs. Martinez," Jake said, his face lighting up despite his obvious weakness. "You came." "Of course I came," Elena said, walking over to his bedside. "How are you feeling?" Jake's parents exchanged a look that Elena couldn't quite read. David cleared his throat. "Mrs. Martinez, thank you for coming. Jake talks about your class all the time. You mean a lot to him." Elena smiled, but she could sense there was something they weren't telling her. "What's going on? What happened?" Maria's eyes filled with tears. 3 days ago, Jake collapsed during basketball practice. We thought it was just exhaustion, but the doctors ran some tests." Elena waited, her heart pounding. "It's leukemia," David said quietly. "Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. It's aggressive." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. She looked at Jake, this bright, wonderful 16-year-old boy, and felt the world shift around her. "But he's going to be okay, right?" Elena asked, though she could already see the answer in his parents' faces. Jake reached for her hand. "Mrs. Martinez, The doctors say I have maybe 6 months, maybe less. Elena felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she fought them back. Jake needed her to be strong right now. "Jake, we're going to fight this," she said firmly. "You're going to get the best treatment, and you're going to beat this." Jake smiled sadly. "I love your optimism, Mrs. Martinez. That's one of the things I've always admired about you. But I need to be realistic about this." Over the next few weeks, Elena visited Jake every day after school. Sometimes they talked about history, sometimes about life, sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence. Jake's condition deteriorated quickly. The chemotherapy made him sick and weak, and he lost his thick brown hair. But his spirit, his curiosity about the world, never dimmed. One Thursday afternoon, Elena found Jake staring out his hospital window at the mountains in the distance. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, settling into the chair beside his bed. "I've been thinking about all the places I'll never get to see," Jake said quietly. "All the historical sites we talked about in class, the Colosseum in Rome, the Great Wall of China, Machu Picchu. I had this whole list of places I wanted to visit when I graduated." Elena's heart ached hearing the sadness in his voice. "I know it sounds silly," Jake continued, "but there was one place that always fascinated me more than any other. Every time you talked about it in class, I got chills." "Which place?" Elena asked. Jake turned to look at her, his eyes brighter than they had been in days. "And Normandy, the D-Day beaches. I know we studied World War II last semester, but something about those beaches, about the courage of those soldiers, it just spoke to me. I always dreamed of standing where they stood, seeing what they saw, honoring what they sacrificed." Elena nodded, remembering how engaged Jake had been during their unit on World War II. He had written a 20-page research paper on D-Day, when the assignment only required 5 pages. "I understand," Elena said. "There's something powerful about standing in places where history was made." Jake was quiet for a moment. Then he looked directly at Elena with an intensity that caught her off guard. "Mrs. Martinez, I know this is going to sound crazy, and I know it's impossible, but I have to ask." His voice was barely above a whisper. "If I don't make it through this, would you go to Normandy for me? Would you stand on those beaches and say a prayer for all the brave people who gave their lives there? And maybe, would you say one for me too?" Elena felt her breath catch in her throat. She looked into Jake's eyes and saw not just a sick teenager, but a young man who understood exactly what he was facing and was trying to find meaning in it. "Jake," she began, but he held up his hand. "I know it's a lot to ask. I know you have your own life, your own responsibilities. But Mrs. Martinez, you've taught me that history isn't just about the past. It's about honoring the people who came before us and carrying their stories forward. If I can't carry those stories myself, maybe you could carry them for me." Elena reached for Jake's hand, and in that moment she made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. "Jake," Elena said, squeezing his hand gently, "that's not crazy at all, and it's not impossible either." Jake's eyes widened with surprise. "What do you mean?" Elena felt something stirring deep inside her, a certainty she hadn't expected. "I mean, I promise you, right here, right now, that I will go to Normandy. I will stand on those beaches, and I will honor every single person who sacrificed everything there, including you." Tears rolled down Jake's cheeks. "You really mean that?" "I have never meant anything more in my entire life," Elena said, and she realized it was completely true. From that day forward, something changed between them. Jake seemed to find new energy, new purpose. He started asking Elena to bring him books about Normandy, about the soldiers who fought there, about the families who lost loved ones. They spent hours talking about the history, the significance, the courage it must have taken to storm those beaches, knowing many would never return home. "Mrs. Martinez," Jake said one afternoon, "I want you to know something. This promise you made, it's given me peace I didn't know I could have. Knowing that part of my story will make it to those beaches, that's everything to me." Elena smiled, though her heart was breaking. "Jake, you are one of the strongest people I have ever known. The soldiers at Normandy would be honored to have you represent them." As the weeks passed, Jake's condition worsened. The doctors tried different treatments, but nothing seemed to slow the disease. Elena watched this brilliant, kind young man grow weaker each day, and it took everything she had not to fall apart. But Jake never complained. He never asked why this was happening to him. Instead, he used his time to write letters to his family, to his friends, and to Elena. He wrote about gratitude, about hope, about the importance of living every day with purpose. One evening, Elena arrived at the hospital to find Jake's parents in the hallway, both crying. "He's asking for you," Maria said through her tears. "The doctors say it could be tonight." Elena's legs felt weak, but she forced herself to walk into Jake's room. He was awake, but barely. His breathing was labored, and his skin was almost translucent. "Mrs. Martinez," he whispered when he saw her. "I'm here, Jake," she said, taking his hand. "The promise," he said. So quietly she had to lean close to hear him. "You'll remember the promise." "Of course I will," Elena said, fighting back tears. "I will never forget." Jake smiled, the same beautiful smile he had given her in class so many times. "Thank you for seeing me. Not just the sick kid, but me, the real me. Jake, you are extraordinary. You always have been. Tell them," he whispered. "Tell them at Normandy that Jake Williams from Denver, Colorado believed in courage. Tell them I understood what they did. I will tell them everything," Elena promised. Jake closed his eyes, still holding her hand. "I'm not scared anymore, Mrs. Martinez. I know my story will continue through you." Those were the last words Jake Williams ever spoke. He passed away peacefully that night, surrounded by his family and his favorite teacher. The funeral was held on a crisp October morning. The church was packed with students, teachers, family, and community members whose lives Jake had touched. Elena spoke about Jake's curiosity, his kindness, and his mature understanding of courage and sacrifice. She told everyone about his dream of visiting Normandy and the promise she had made. After the service, David and Maria Williams approached Elena. "We heard about your promise to Jake," David said. "We want you to know how much it meant to him." "It means everything to me, too," Elena replied. Maria handed Elena a small wooden box. "Jake wanted you to have this. He worked on it during his last weeks in the hospital." Elena opened the box with trembling hands. Inside was a hand-carved wooden cross, simple but beautiful. Attached was a note in Jake's careful handwriting. "For the beaches of Normandy, so they know Jake Williams was here in spirit. Thank you for keeping your promise. Love, Jake." Elena held the cross to her heart and knew that nothing would stop her from fulfilling Jake's last wish. But as she stood there in the cemetery, watching Jake's casket being lowered into the ground, Elena had no idea how complicated her promise would become. She didn't know about the obstacles that lay ahead, the people who would try to stop her, or the incredible journey that would test her determination in ways she never imagined. What Elena did know was that Jake Williams had changed her life forever, and now it was her turn to change his. The next morning, Elena sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open, researching flights to France. She had been teaching for 12 years, living paycheck to paycheck like most teachers. A trip to Normandy would cost more money than she had saved in months. But as she looked at Jake's wooden cross sitting beside her coffee cup, Elena realized that some promises are worth any sacrifice. Elena opened her savings account statement and stared at the numbers. $4,300. That was everything she had managed to save over 2 years of careful budgeting. A round-trip ticket to France would cost at least $1,500. Hotels, meals, transportation to Normandy, it would easily cost another $1,000. She was looking at spending more than half her life savings on this promise. Her phone rang, interrupting her calculations. It was her sister Carmen calling from Phoenix. "Elena, I heard about your student. I'm so sorry. Mom told me you spoke at his funeral." "Thanks, Carmen. It's been really hard. Listen, I also heard some crazy rumor that you're planning to go to France. Please tell me that's not true." Elena took a deep breath. "It's not a rumor. I promised Jake I would go to Normandy for him. I'm going to keep that promise." Carmen was quiet for a moment. "Elena, you can't afford a trip to Europe. You know that, right? You're a teacher, not a millionaire. This is sweet, but it's not realistic." "I'll figure it out," Elena said firmly. "With what money? And what about your job? You can't just take time off whenever you want." Elena felt frustration rising in her chest. "Carmen, this isn't some vacation. This is something I have to do. Elena, listen to me. I understand you cared about this kid, but he's gone. Spending your life savings on some symbolic gesture isn't going to bring him back." Elena hung up the phone, her hands shaking. She knew Carmen meant well, but she didn't understand. Nobody understood what this promise meant. The next day at school, word had somehow spread about Elena's plan. During lunch, several of her colleagues approached her in the teacher's lounge. "Elena," said Mrs. Davidson, the math teacher, "we heard you're thinking about going to France. Are you sure that's wise?" Elena looked up from her sandwich. "It's something I need to do." Mr. Rodriguez, who taught next door, sat down across from her. "Look, we all loved Jake. He was a special kid, but you can't fix grief by flying across the world." "This isn't about fixing grief," Elena said, her voice steady but firm. "This is about keeping a promise to a dying boy." Mrs. Davidson leaned forward. "Elena, think practically. You're a single woman. You live alone. What happens if you spend all your money on this trip and then have an emergency? What if your car breaks down? What if you get sick?" Elena felt surrounded, like everyone was trying to talk her out of something they couldn't possibly understand. "Jake asked me to do this," she said quietly. "He trusted me with his last wish. I'm not going to let him down." Mr. Rodriguez shook his head. "Elena, you're a wonderful teacher, but you're not responsible for fulfilling every request a student makes. You gave him comfort when he was dying. That was enough." "It wasn't enough for me," Elena said, standing up and gathering her things, "and it wasn't enough for Jake." As she walked back to her classroom, Elena felt more alone than she had ever felt in her life. Everyone thought she was being irrational, impractical, even stupid. But every time she looked at Jake's empty desk in her first period class, she knew she was doing the right thing. That evening, Elena called her bank to ask about personal loans. The loan officer, Mrs. Chen, was polite but direct. "Ms. Martinez, based on your income and current savings, we could approve you for a small personal loan, but the interest rates would be quite high. May I ask what you need the money for?" Elena explained about Jake and her promise. Mrs. Chen was quiet for a long moment. "Ms. Martinez, that's a very touching story, but I have to ask if you've considered other ways to honor your student's memory. Perhaps a scholarship fund or a memorial at the school?" "This is what he asked for," Elena said. "This is what I promised." "I understand, but from a financial perspective, taking on debt for international travel when you're already living on a tight budget could put you in a very difficult position." Elena felt the walls closing in around her. Everyone had an opinion about her promise, and none of those opinions were supportive. After hanging up with the bank, Elena sat in her living room, holding Jake's wooden cross. She thought about his face in those final weeks, how peaceful he had looked when she made her promise. She remembered his words about carrying stories forward, about honoring courage. She opened her laptop and started researching again. If she couldn't afford to go right away, maybe she could plan for next year. Maybe she could find a way to raise money. Maybe there was another path. That's when she discovered something that changed everything. There was an organization called Honor Flights that took veterans to visit war memorials. She found another group that helped families visit overseas military cemeteries. Surely there had to be someone who would understand what she was trying to do. She spent hours reading stories of other people who had made similar journeys. Teachers who had taken students to historical sites, families who had traveled to honor fallen relatives, people who had made promises to dying loved ones and found ways to keep them. Elena realized she wasn't alone in this. There were others who understood that some promises can't be broken, no matter how impractical they seem. The next morning, Elena made a decision that surprised even herself. She walked into her principal's office before first period. "Mr. Thompson, I need to talk to you about taking some time off." Principal Thompson looked up from his paperwork. "Elena, good morning. What's this about?" "I need to go to France, to Normandy. I made a promise to Jake Williams before he died." Mr. Thompson leaned back in his chair. "Elena, I heard about your student. I'm very sorry for your loss, but taking time off for international travel, especially during the school year, that's complicated." "I know it's complicated, but I have to do this." Mr. Thompson studied her face. "Elena, you're one of our best teachers. Your students love you. Your colleagues respect you. But this sounds like you're making an emotional decision during a difficult time." "Maybe I am," Elena said, "but it's still the right decision." "When were you thinking of going?" Elena took a deep breath. "Spring break. I could extend it by a few days, take some personal time." Mr. Thompson was quiet for a moment. "Elena, I can't stop you from using your personal time, but I want you to think carefully about this. Grief can make us feel like we need to do dramatic things to honor someone we've lost, but sometimes the best way to honor them is to continue doing the work they valued. Jake valued courage, Mr. Thompson. He valued keeping promises. He valued standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Mr. Thompson nodded slowly. If you're determined to do this, I won't stand in your way, but promise me you'll think it through carefully. I've been thinking about nothing else for weeks. That afternoon, Elena started making concrete plans. She would go during spring break, which was still 5 months away. That would give her time to save more money, to plan the trip properly, to make sure she could do this right. She started a notebook specifically for her Normandy trip. She researched the beaches, the memorials, the history. She read accounts from D-Day veterans. She studied maps and planned her route. Every evening after school, Elena worked on her plan. She contacted the American Battle Monuments Commission to learn about visiting overseas military cemeteries. She researched the best times to visit, the most meaningful locations, the proper way to pay respects. But as the weeks passed, Elena realized that the more she learned about Normandy, the more overwhelming her promise became. This wasn't just about visiting a beach. This was about understanding one of the most significant moments in human history. This was about honoring not just Jake, but thousands of young men who had given everything for freedom. Elena began to worry that she wasn't worthy of this task. She was just a high school history teacher from Denver. What did she know about properly honoring such sacrifice? What if she went all the way to France and couldn't find the right words? What if she let Jake down? One evening, as she sat at her kitchen table surrounded by research materials, Elena felt a familiar presence. She could almost hear Jake's voice, the way he used to ask thoughtful questions in class. "Mrs. Martinez," she imagined him saying, "you taught me that history isn't about being perfect. It's about being human. It's about caring enough to try." Elena looked at Jake's wooden cross, sitting among all her papers and plans. She realized that Jake hadn't chosen her for this promise, because she was the most qualified person in the world. He had chosen her because he trusted her heart. That night, Elena made another decision. She would not just go to Normandy for Jake. She would prepare for this journey the way Jake would have wanted her to prepare. She would learn everything she could. She would approach this with the same curiosity and respect that Jake had always shown in her classroom. Elena started reaching out to World War II historians, to veterans organizations, to people who had made similar pilgrimages. She wanted to understand not just what happened at Normandy, but what it meant. She wanted to be worthy of the promise she had made. But even as Elena threw herself into preparation, she had no idea that her biggest challenges were still ahead of her. She didn't know about the unexpected phone call that would threaten to derail everything. She didn't know about the stranger who would try to stop her from going. And she didn't know about the discovery she would make that would change her understanding of Jake's wish completely. All Elena knew was that Jake Williams had trusted her with something precious, and no matter what obstacles lay ahead, she would find a way to honor that trust. The promise she had made in a hospital room was becoming something bigger than either of them had imagined. It was becoming a journey that would test everything Elena believed about loyalty, courage, and love. Elena's phone rang on a cold February morning, jolting her awake at 5:30. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. "Hello?" she answered, her voice thick with sleep. "Is this Elena Martinez?" The voice was formal, official sounding. "Yes, who is this?" "This is Detective Robert Hayes with the Denver Police Department. I need to ask you some questions about Jake Williams." Elena sat up in bed, her heart suddenly racing. "What about Jake? He passed away 4 months ago." I'm aware of that, ma'am. I'm calling because we've received some concerning information about your relationship with the deceased minor." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "I'm sorry, what?" "Ma'am, we've received a complaint suggesting inappropriate contact between you and the student. Someone has alleged that you may have taken advantage of a vulnerable minor during his illness." Elena's hands began to shake. "That's absolutely not true. Jake was my student. I visited him in the hospital because I cared about him as a teacher." "Ma'am, I understand you're planning to travel internationally and claiming it's related to this student. That raises some red flags for us." Elena felt like she was falling through space. Who told you that? Who made this complaint? I can't reveal that information, but I need you to come down to the station this afternoon for questioning. Can you be here at 2 o'clock? Detective Hayes, I haven't done anything wrong. Jake was dying, and I promised him I would go to Normandy to honor fallen soldiers. That's all this is. Ma'am, that's what we need to discuss. 2 o'clock. The line went dead. Elena stared at her phone, unable to believe what had just happened. Someone had reported her to the police for caring about a dying student. Elena called in sick to school and spent the morning pacing her apartment, trying to understand who could have done this. Who would want to stop her from keeping her promise to Jake? At 2 o'clock sharp, Elena walked into the Denver Police Department. Detective Hayes was a tall, stern-looking man in his 50s who led her to a small interview room. Ms. Martinez, I appreciate you coming in. I want to be clear that you're not under arrest. We're just investigating a complaint. Elena folded her hands in her lap to stop them from trembling. What exactly am I being accused of? The complainant alleges that you formed an inappropriate emotional relationship with a minor student. They suggest you may have manipulated a sick child for your own psychological needs. Elena felt sick. Detective Hayes, I was Jake's teacher for 2 years. When he got sick, I visited him like many teachers would visit a student. There was nothing inappropriate about it. But you made plans to travel internationally based on something this child asked you to do? Jake asked me to visit Normandy and say a prayer for fallen soldiers. It was his dying wish. There's nothing sinister about that. Detective Hayes opened a file folder. The complainant says you spent excessive time alone with the minor, that you made promises designed to make yourself feel important, and that you're now using his death to justify expensive personal travel. Elena's eyes filled with tears of frustration and anger. That's not true. None of that is true. Ms. Martinez, help me understand. Why would a teacher spend thousands of dollars to travel to France for a student? Elena looked directly into the detective's eyes. Because I loved that kid. Not inappropriately, but the way a teacher loves a student who reminds them why they became a teacher in the first place. Jake was special. He was kind, curious, and brave. When he was dying, he asked me for one thing. How could I say no? Detective Hayes studied her face carefully. Ms. Martinez, I've been doing this job for 23 years. I've seen teachers who cross lines with students, but I've also seen teachers who genuinely care about their kids. Elena waited, hardly breathing. The person who made this complaint, they wouldn't give me their name. Anonymous tips like this, they're usually from someone with an agenda, someone who wants to cause trouble. Elena felt a small spark of hope. So you don't think I did anything wrong? I think you're a teacher who cared about a dying student. That's not a crime, but I need to give you some advice. Elena nodded. There are people out there who don't understand the kind of relationship teachers can have with their students. People who see something innocent and twist it into something ugly. If you're really planning to go to France, be prepared for more scrutiny. Elena left the police station feeling shaken but determined. Someone was actively trying to stop her from keeping her promise to Jake. But who and why? That evening, Elena's phone rang again. This time it was Maria Williams, Jake's mother. Elena, I heard what happened today. I'm so sorry. Mrs. Williams, you heard about the police? David and I got a call from Detective Hayes. He wanted to verify that we were comfortable with your visits to Jake in the hospital. Elena's stomach dropped. What did you tell him? We told him the truth, that you were wonderful to Jake, that your visits brought him more joy than anything else during his illness, that you were like family to us. Elena felt tears of relief. Thank you. I was so scared you might think there was something wrong with what I did. Elena, there are people in this world who can't understand pure kindness when they see it. Someone is trying to hurt you, and I think I know who. Elena's pulse quickened. Who? Do you remember Jake's basketball coach, Coach Miller? Elena remembered him vaguely. A middle-aged man who had seemed uncomfortable at Jake's funeral. He came to see us last week, Maria continued. He was asking a lot of questions about you, about how much time you spent with Jake, about this trip you're planning. He seemed to think it was inappropriate. Elena felt pieces clicking together. Why would he care? Because he feels guilty. Jake collapsed during his practice, and Coach Miller didn't take it seriously at first. He made Jake keep practicing, even though Jake said he felt weak. When Jake finally collapsed, Coach Miller was angry, thought Jake was being dramatic, Elena's heart ached imagining Jake trying to push through practice while fighting leukemia. Coach Miller has been eaten up with guilt ever since Jake died. I think seeing you do something meaningful for Jake makes him feel even worse about how he treated him. So he reported me to the police. I can't prove it, but David thinks so too. Coach Miller kept saying that teachers shouldn't get so involved with students, that it wasn't natural. Elena felt anger rising in her chest. Coach Miller's guilt was threatening to destroy her promise to Jake. Mrs. Williams, I want you to know that no matter what anyone says or does, I'm still going to Normandy. I'm going to keep my promise to Jake. Elena, we know you will, and we support you completely. In fact, David and I have been talking. We want to help. Elena was surprised. Help how? We've been putting aside money for a memorial for Jake. We were thinking about a scholarship or a plaque at the school, but we've decided we want to give that money to you for your trip to Normandy. Elena's breath caught. Mrs. Williams, I can't take your money. Elena, this isn't charity. This is a mother and father asking you to carry their son's spirit to a place he dreamed of seeing. We can't think of a better memorial for Jake than having someone who loved him stand on those beaches and speak his name. Elena was crying now. How much are we talking about? On $3,000. It's not everything, but it should cover most of your expenses. Elena felt overwhelmed by their generosity. I don't know what to say. Say yes. Say you'll take Jake's spirit to Normandy and bring us back a piece of sand from those beaches. Yes, Elena whispered. Yes, of course. 2 weeks later, Elena received another unexpected phone call. This time it was from a reporter at the Denver Post. Ms. Martinez, I'm Sarah Chen from the Denver Post. I'm working on a story about teachers who go above and beyond for their students. I heard about your promise to visit Normandy for Jake Williams. Elena was immediately suspicious. How did you hear about that? Someone contacted our newsroom with your story. They seemed to think it was newsworthy. Elena wondered if this was another attempt to sabotage her plans. What kind of story are you writing? Actually, I think it's a beautiful story. I'd like to interview you about your relationship with Jake and your upcoming trip. Elena hesitated. I don't know if I want to be in the newspaper. Ms. Martinez, I understand your hesitation, but I think your story could inspire other people. It could show the world what teaching really means. Elena thought about Jake, about how he had always encouraged her to share the stories that mattered. Okay, she said finally. I'll talk to you. The interview took place at Elena's school after classes ended. Sarah Chen was a kind woman in her 30s who asked thoughtful questions and really listened to Elena's answers. Tell me about Jake, Sarah said. What kind of student was he? Elena smiled, feeling Jake's presence in the room. Jake was the kind of student who reminded you why you became a teacher. He was curious about everything, kind to everyone, and mature beyond his years. When did you realize how sick he was? The day I visited him in the hospital. Seeing him in that bed, so weak and scared, it broke my heart. But Jake never complained. He never asked why this was happening to him. Instead, he started thinking about how he could make meaning from his situation. And that's when he asked you to go to Normandy? Elena nodded. Jake had always been fascinated by World War II, especially D-Day. He wrote this incredible research paper about the courage of the soldiers who stormed those beaches. When he realized he would never get to see Normandy himself, he asked me to go for him. Some people might say that's an unusual request for a student to make of a teacher. Elena met Sarah's eyes directly. Some people don't understand what it means to truly see a student as a whole person. Jake wasn't just asking me to take a vacation. He was asking me to carry forward something important, to honor courage and sacrifice. How do you respond to people who say you're being impractical? Spending money you don't have on this trip? Elena thought for a moment. I think there are things more important than being practical. Keeping promises to dying children is one of them. The article was published 3 days later with the headline, Teacher's Promise. Denver educator plans Europe trip to honor dying students' last wish. Elena was nervous about how people would react, but the response was overwhelmingly positive. Her phone started ringing with calls from people who wanted to support her mission. A local travel agency offered to help plan her trip at cost. A veterans organization reached out to provide guidance on visiting Normandy respectfully. Former students sent messages of support. Even some of her colleagues who had initially questioned her decision began to see her promise in a different light. But the call that meant the most came from an elderly man named Frank Patterson. "Ms. Martinez, I read about you in the paper. I'm 94 years old, and I was at Omaha Beach on D-Day." Elena's heart stopped. "Mr. Patterson, really?" "Yes, ma'am. I was 19 years old, scared out of my mind, but we did what we had to do. I lost a lot of good friends on that beach." Elena felt the weight of history in his voice. "Mr. Patterson, I can't imagine what that was like. Ms. Martinez, I want you to know that what you're doing for that boy, it means everything to those of us who were there. We've always worried that people would forget what happened at Normandy. Having a teacher carry a student's spirit to those beaches, that's exactly what we hoped for." Elena was crying. "Thank you for telling me that. Ms. Martinez, I have something for you. My squad leader's dog tags. He didn't make it off the beach that day. His name was Tommy Morrison from Kansas City. He was 21 years old. Would you take his tags to Normandy too? Would you speak his name on those beaches?" Elena felt the magnitude of what her promise had become. "Mr. Patterson, I would be honored." The next week, Elena met Mr. Patterson at a coffee shop near her school. He was a small, gentle man with kind eyes and weathered hands. He gave her a small box containing the dog tags and a faded photograph of a young soldier. "Ah, that's Tommy," he said, pointing to the photo. "Best friend I ever had. We promised each other we'd make it home together. I've been carrying his tags for 78 years, waiting for the right person to take them back to where he fell." Elena held the dog tags carefully, feeling their weight. "Mr. Patterson, why me? Why now?" "Because you understand what promises mean. Because you know that some things are bigger than ourselves." As Elena prepared for her trip, she realized that her promise to Jake had grown into something much larger. She wasn't just carrying one boy's wish to Normandy. She was carrying the hopes and memories of everyone who had been touched by Jake's story. 3 weeks before her departure, Elena got a final surprise. Principal Thompson called her into his office. "Elena, sit down. I have something to tell you." Elena braced herself for bad news. The school board met last night. They voted unanimously to give you a leave of absence with pay for your trip to Normandy. They want to officially support your mission. Elena stared at him in shock. "Are you serious?" "Elena, your story has inspired this entire community. The board realizes that what you're doing represents the very best of what teaching can be." Elena felt tears of gratitude rolling down her cheeks. "I can't believe this is happening." "Believe it. And Elena, when you get back, we want you to share your experience with our students. We want them to understand what it means to honor promises, to care about something bigger than themselves." The night before her flight, Elena sat in her living room, surrounded by everything she would carry to Normandy. Jake's wooden cross, Tommy Morrison's dog tags, letters from Jake's parents, sand from a Colorado beach that Jake had loved as a child, a small American flag from her classroom. Elena thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, the promise made in a hospital room, the obstacles that had tried to stop her, the people who had supported her when she needed it most. She picked up Jake's wooden cross and held it close to her heart. "Tomorrow, Jake," she whispered. "Tomorrow I keep my promise." Elena Martinez would board a plane to France carrying more than just a dying boy's wish. She would carry the hopes of everyone who believed that promises matter, that love transcends death, and that sometimes the most important journeys are the ones that seem impossible. What happened on the beaches of Normandy would exceed even Elena's expectations. But that's a story for another day. What matters is that Elena Martinez, a high school teacher from Denver, proved that some promises are worth any sacrifice. Jake Williams had chosen the right person to trust with his final wish. And in keeping that promise, Elena discovered that the greatest lessons aren't taught in classrooms. They're taught in the moments when we choose love over fear, courage over comfort, and promises over practicality.